Port Hudson, hardly anybody really thinks about it, but it is part of the concerted effort by the Union to actually free the Mississippi River, or as Abraham Lincoln let the river flow unvexed to the sea. And basically, Port Hudson is below Vicksburg, and it's about 120 miles distance between the two. And actually flowing into the Mississippi there at between Vicksburg and Port Hudson are two major rivers, the White River and the Red River. And so all of a sudden you think that this is a major funneling of supplies. We wanted to capture the Mississippi, if you're a Unionist, because of we want our goods up in Illinois and so forth to be able to go all the way to New Orleans. And with the Confederates having cannon up on bluffs meant you couldn't send your transports down. So they had to break that stranglehold the Confederates had because of economic reasons in the North. Notice where much of the anti-war sentiment is rising in the North during the Civil War. It is Indiana, Illinois, right, Michigan. Why is that? Because they can't get their goods to market anymore, and that is causing them economic dislocation, and they cannot withstand that. So you have copperheads, so to speak, that were rife throughout Illinois and Indiana. Well, you have to realize by early summer 1861, the Federals had conquered Memphis, which is a major port. However, despite all the resources they have brought, they don't have quite enough to make that final move. Just think of where Memphis is. Next big port coming down is going to be, I think I have a map. I don't have a clicker though. There it is. I'm an airhead, trust me. So you can see, let me do this right. I'm not very good with this machine. Natchez, which is conquered in 1862. Keep going up. See where all these bluffs and everything is? That is where the Confederates are holding the river, because these bluffs are indefensible. The Confederates actually built an ironclad up the Yazoo River, known as the CSS Arkansas, which sadly will be mishandled by the Confederates, and it will be blown up. So when Natchez and Memphis falls, P.G.T. Beauregard, the hero of Fort Sumter, recommends that Port Hudson be defended. And because it is up on an 80-foot, there are chairs back here, it's up on an 80-foot bluff, and it's at a major bend in the river. So basically, you can see right here. Now, if I'm trying to pass Fort Hudson, I have to make this turn, come up, and make this sharp turn. Notice where the Confederates have water batteries. Here, 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 and here. This is the choke point making this turn, because it's filled with sandbanks and other obstructions that are going to make you have to stay in a channel, and you're working on a fast-moving stream, because when Vicksburg and Port Hudson are going to be invested, it's the spring tide, right? And so the river's running fast, and it's running south. So that is a huge problem for the Federals as they start to look at what they're going to do in 1863. Now, Port Hudson has all these hills and other natural fortification advantages behind or land faced. This is the man that begins the fortifications at Port Hudson. His name is Daniel Ruggles. He was a hero of the Battle of Shiloh at the Hornet's Nest. He was a West Point graduate. This guy is a very able commander, and he starts building the series of fortifications that are going to be able to enable the Confederates to defend the river. Now, the Federals have two different fleets, so actually there are three fleets that are involved in this. We know one is called the Ellet Ram Fleet, which was created because Gideon Welles didn't want to have anything to do with, boats on the Mississippi. He was worried about the blockade. So we start building rams like the Queen of the West and ironclads. This is one devised by James Eads and completed construction by William Porter, brother to David Dixon Porter. And this is actually a catamaran, believe it or not, that they fit the iron casemate on top of. This is known as the Essex, not a good ironclad. So the man that's going to be placed in command of basically Port Hudson is going to be this man, Major General Franklin Gardner. Now, Gardner, right, was born in New York City. His father was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He gets an appointment to West Point from Iowa, and as a result of that, he joins the Army. However, his mother is from Louisiana and is close with several Louisiana big rice and cotton planters. Actually, his mother influences Frank to marry the daughter of the governor of Louisiana, Francis Moultrie. And wow, that's cause I've got decisions to make when the Civil War comes. Frank makes the right one because his eldest sister had married the governor, his father-in-law, when the father-in-law's original wife dies. And so what are you going to do? I mean, so he's a very able commander. Everyone speaks extremely highly of him. He's about 5'5", and he graduates in the middle of the ranks at West Point. He does serve during the Mexican War with valor. He's breveted to the rank of captain. So he uses a chief engineer known as James Noquet, who is going to build a series of lunettes and readouts. And what they're going to do is these readouts and everything these are where the Confederates lived during the winter. I wouldn't go there. And so basically, Fort Hudson is a series of land-based and sea-based or river-based fortifications. This is so important for our story because I have to tell you that they decide in spring, well, actually late winter, 1863, that we're going to make that final push. Ulysses S. Grant is working with David Dixon Porter, and they're moving against Vicksburg. They've tried many ways to get there, but it's not until late March that they're going to actually find a way to Vicksburg, and that's going down below and crossing the river and cutting off Vicksburg from Jackson. So John Carroll Pemberton, also a West Pointer, he is in command of Vicksburg, and he makes the decision that we're going to hole up in Vicksburg and protect the town, because Jefferson Davis said you got to hold Vicksburg because Vicksburg's the key to the supplies that we're receiving. So this is not a real great thing. So coming up from the south is supposed to be Nathaniel Banks, Major General Nathaniel Banks, and Rear Admiral David Glasgow Farragut. we all know a lot about Farragut, I think. Farragut, of course, was the hero of New Orleans. He founded the Mare Island Navy Yard. He was a midshipman at the age of 9. At the age of 12, he was in command of a prize vessel and put down a rebellion or a mutiny, right? Because they had the old crew on board. And in doing so, they said he was 120 pounds, 90 pounds of swords and pistols, and 30 pounds of person. But he had such a fierceness that, of course, they all said, oh, well, we're sorry, we'll go back down and leave you alone. Because, I think he had a dirk in his mouth. He kind of looked like a pirate. Because he actually, Farragut, was originally named John Farragut, but because his mother had died, his father had farmed out Farragut to one of his friends, David Dixon Porter II, and as a result of that, he changes his first name to David and is very closely represented with the Porter family during the war. So basically, I have to tell you that the object is for Farragut to take his ocean-going vessels and run past the battery at Port Hudson. Now, I got to tell you, this was very difficult to do because of the tide. The Confederates have bonfires all along the river. They know the Federals are coming. There's no doubt. They have spies. And so, basically, what Farragut does, he's supposed to meet with Nathaniel Banks at Port Hudson on or about March 15, 1863. I'll get into Nathaniel Banks in just a bit, but guess what? He's not even out of Baton Rouge by that time. And if you know history, you know Farragut is an impatient person and is a real go-getter. Banks is supposed to bring these 17,000 men and attack simultaneously the land face while Farragut attacks the river face. Wow, the Confederates couldn't take this because originally Port Hudson had 16,000 defenders. However, 7,000 of those men are going to be transferred up to Vicksburg. So they have a small 9,000 men defending this very strategic point. I have to say, they have done their gun emplacements in an excellent fashion. They have 8-inch Columbiads. They have several banded 32-pounders, meaning they are rifled. And they all have practiced these different points in the river because they knew how the river worked. So Farragut, when he learns that good old Banks is stuck in the mud, and so, because this is spring, so it's bad conditions to march anywhere, Farragut decides, well, I'm going to run past Port Hudson anyway. I don't need Banks, and I'll capture Port Hudson from above. So what he does is he gets, there it is. So these are the main ships that Farragut has. The Hartford, the Richmond, and the Monongahela are all steam screw frigates of the Hartford class. They have a draft of 18 feet, and so they're steam powered, and they will be lashed to other Union gunboats, like the Albatross with the Hartford, as you can see, the Genesee with the Richmond, the Keno, and then the Mississippi doesn't have anyone to lash to because it is a paddler. Okay, so this, actually the Mississippi was the real first steam-powered warship the U.S. Navy will put into action. And this was guided by Matthew Galbraith Perry, and so it was in Japan. So, it was an important ship for the U.S. Navy. Because of the paddlers, it can't have anybody lashed to it. So, despite all the planned cooperation, on March 14th, Farragut says, we're just going to run past the batteries. He begins his move upriver from Baton Rouge at 10 a.m. You have to realize the Confederates, when they see them coming, and they get news from people along the banks and everything, when they see this happening, they get ready. Okay, they have pine knot bonfires so that they're lighting the whole river up. The wind this evening and early morning is going to favor, it's from the east, so it's blowing all the smoke onto what? The Union ships. So the Confederates can see them. The Union have difficult aiming at the Confederate forts. Well, I want to tell you, the Hartford would make the first run. Now, what Farragut had done to his ships is put sandbags up near the machinery. He put chains down the side of his vessels, all to protect from Confederate shot. This only works so well, and as a result of it, the Hartford makes the first run and will run aground right up here. Of course, there are two Confederate batteries right over there. It is stuck in the mud, but somehow, using the albatross, it will get off the mud and passes. Next up is going to be the Richmond that was, now just think the Confederates have hot shot, glowing red cannonballs, shells, and solid shot, shooting downward from an 80-foot bluff onto the Federals. So the Richmond, as it passes up passes by the batteries, it will have a shock hit the deck, break off the steam valve, and pierce the steam drum. In other words, the entire ship fills with steam, and so it drops back river. When the Monongahela comes up and sees this, is going, well, what's going on? And so the Genesee will kind of help the ship back downriver. The Monongahela were slated next to pass. However, they ran aground on the western shore. And of course, they ran aground right around here, which, you can see Confederate forts there. So they are going to be pounded. They have to tie down the safety valves and everything to try and pull the ship off the mud bank. However, the Monongahela's engines overheated and stopped. And so that ship floats back down the river. Now comes the Mississippi. Here's, of course, Farragut. There's the Hartford, Richmond, Monongahela, the Mississippi. Mississippi is the last one to come, right? And I have to tell you that the Mississippi is actually still one of the prides of the U.S. Navy. So consequently, as it comes up the river, it will be struck by hot shot. You can see the ship burning. That is the Mississippi. It is terrible. It runs aground and then is plummeted by Confederate shot. So they have to abandon ship. Somehow the boat breaks free from the sandbar and goes down river towards Baton Rouge, where it blows up 50 miles south, right? But you could hear it in Vicksburg. You could hear it in New Orleans. So we now are faced with a problem, and Farragut has gotten, wait a second, not him yet. Farragut had gotten just two of his ships above Port Hudson. And he says, what a great success. Yeah, we lost the Mississippi, but we're now able to blockade the Red and White rivers. Well, at the loss of these ships and limited control of the rivers, Farragut had acted hastily, and this is probably one of his worst moves of the Civil War. Meanwhile, we're going to have this man stand in and take command. He is Nathaniel Banks. Now, Nathaniel Banks has a very interesting story. He has no military training whatsoever, although he was in the Massachusetts militia for a while. He grew up with limited schooling. In fact, his family became so destitute that, in essence, Banks has to work in a factory. He's a bobbin boy. In other words, he's got to stick his hand in the machinery and change the bobbins. Very dangerous. They like to use younger people because, they had smaller hands. But Banks believes in education. He also believes in, saving his money. So basically, there's a little book that you can read called The Bobbin Boy of Waltham, Massachusetts. And guess who that's about? There's a penny novel. And so Banks saves his money so that he actually buys the factory, right? He is a member of all these debating societies. Remember, he has limited education, but because of his reading, he gets to hear Daniel Webster speak, and this is uplifting towards him. So he becomes a master debater. And of course, if you're a master debater, what are you? You're a politician. And he becomes a member of, at first, the anti-Mason party, believe it or not. And then he becomes a member of the Know Nothing party, but eventually joins the Republican Party. He is the Speaker of the House of U.S. Representatives during the debates about the Kansas-Nebraska Act, right? And it is said by Hal Cobb, who is a Confederate later, that he was the best Speaker of the House in history, well, up to that date, of course, but he knew how to allow people to make partisan moves and so forth. So he was a brilliant debater. He then decides to become governor of Massachusetts. He's a Republican, and so this great tide of the rise of the Republican Party that's happening between 1856 and 1860, he's part of that, right? He's wealthy, he's influential. I have to say that he is an outstanding individual as a politician. Now, that does not mean he's very good as an officer, because when the war broke out, he immediately asked to be, he knew Lincoln, he wanted to join the army. So Lincoln made him a major general of volunteers. Let me just tell you about Nathaniel Banks briefly. I should have done this in 2 lectures, but Banks is very inept. He is going to be assigned to the Army of the Potomac, right? And part of his work is going to be defending and conquering the Shenandoah Valley as McClellan is bringing his army up the peninsula. What does Banks do? He is duped by Stonewall Jackson, and actually he's in Strasburg, then he's forced back to Port Royal, then to Winchester, then to Frederick, Maryland. So he's going the wrong way, okay? And so Banks is, no one says anything to him because he has such political power that it's okay. He'll do better eventually. He will actually, at the beginning of the Second Manassas campaign, fight his best battle, people will say, called Cedar Mountain. He loses it, but he does do this one flank move that's pretty successful, and but Stonewall Jackson would have none of it. So here's a guy with 5 defeats, right? And so what are you going to do with a guy like this? And it just so happens that the Union had already conquered New Orleans, and as a result of that, they have a military governor who's known as, you can all boo now, Benjamin Franklin Butler. And Butler was known for a little bit of graft and grifting, and so as a result of that, he's going to be replaced by Nathaniel Banks. Okay? Now, Nathaniel Banks is not such a grifter, but the people around him are. His trouble about leaving Baton Rouge in mid-March 1863 is not because his army's not ready, is because he sent an entire division to go up the Red River and collect the cotton, right? Because then it all came down, and guess what? They're cotton agents, and everyone's making a lot of money, and because it's free cotton. So I have to say that Banks is there. He's an astute military governor, but I have to say that Farragut doesn't like him, and so Farragut does not talk directly to him, right? In other words, I got to tell my lieutenant, go tell Banks such and such, you know. And so that's not a way to really command for a major battle. But it doesn't matter because Banks, actually his official portrait will be, oh, wow. So now you can see that Banks finally gets on the move, and it will be in late May that he will arrange to besiege Port Hudson. Now, basically, Gardner realizes the game is up, and just as he plans to retreat to Jackson. Now, I got to tell you, Gardner has a problem. His overall commander is a man known as John Pemberton, stuck in Vicksburg, wants reinforcements. His overall commander is Johnson, Joseph Eggleston Johnson, who's in Jackson. Johnson says, come here. Pemberton says, come here. Gardner finally gets ready to move to Jackson, and what will happen is that Banks will show up. Now, there cannot be any effective naval support during this siege, primarily because of the water batteries that the Confederates have. You know, I think one redan, which is where you see Shelby, right? That had 2 8-inch Columbiads with hotshot furnaces, and so they were able to, any ship trying to come back down river, because remember the Union fleet is now separated, they're going to be pummeled at that bend. That bend, now you can see this is where the Mississippi River is today. This is where it was back then. And so you have to realize that, so the Federal Navy cannot support this action. So Banks will actually bring his, eventually he'll have 31,000 men, and they will be able to invest Gardner. Now, Banks originally had 17,000 men, but he asked for reinforcements because when he first gets there, he is going to attack. And the trouble with his attack is, let's just see. Now, this was the first use of African-American soldiers in a battle during the Civil War, 2nd Louisiana Colored, as they would call it back then, and they are trying to take one of the lunettes, and they cannot. Basically, Banks will be reinforced up to 40,000 men. And so basically on 27 May 1863, this is the attack that's going to be repulsed. Okay, this is one of no relation to William Tecumseh Sherman. So this, you can see, this is the covered way leading to the 8-inch Columbiad. Look at the river down below. What a great location. Now, the Federals on May 27, they all gather in a wooden ravine that leads to a swamp. So here are these guys, not where in a swamp, in the woods, and then they launch their attack on the 27th. This attack, I have to tell you, is going uphill against entrenched Confederates. And basically, they get trapped in a section of the defenses that are going to be called the bullpen, because it's just like you do with cattle. You move your cattle into a pen, right? And so that's like what was happening with the Union soldiers. They were funneled into an area where the Confederates could practice a crossfire on them. They actually, you can't tell by this picture, but that gun is on a circular pivot mount. In other words, I can shoot at the river, I can shoot up the river, down the river, and I actually can shoot at the guys coming at me from the land. So this was terrible. The attack was halted, and basically it was said that the 2nd Louisiana Colored showed distinction and determination and courage beyond compare. Now, actually, 2nd Louisiana has a African-American captain known as Andre Califlux, and he gave his commands both in English and French, so he was, in essence, now, no one can really support the Union attack, so as a result of that, this is the land-face defenses, and this is in the defenses. Notice how the landscape drops off going the other way. That meant that Banks, and so Banks forms a formal siege, and this is a sapper pioneer group. You can see they have a chete de frais that they're rolling. That's a wire, wooden basket to protect them as they're digging an approach tent. And you can see these guys are very hot. This is around June 1, 1863, once again in Louisiana. Basically, Banks will then say, hey, let's make another attack. We're close enough so we can spring up at them. He organized an attack on all fronts, but the big trouble is the Navy can't support it, and also the attacks go off piecemeal instead of like a trip hammer they're supposed to do. And as a result of that, Banks's men are going to be defeated. And after their defeat, guess what? Banks sends a note to Gardner saying, hey, you lost that battle, and so you should surrender now. And Gardner writes back, my duty requires me to defend this position, and therefore I decline to surrender. Now, I have to tell you, food stocks are starting to run low in Port Hudson. There is no way that they're going to get reinforced. And so after 48 days of siege, Gardner is forced to surrender. Of course, center in the picture is good old Banks. Doesn't deserve that. So anyway, the siege and battle of Port Hudson happens to be a combined operation that fails. Well, it doesn't fail because eventually it is successful at the cost of over 12,000 Union casualties. Okay, just think of that. That's out of 40. Okay, so you can do that math, and you realize, and part of it was disease, malaria in the swamps. Port Hudson's up on high on a cliff, but they're also dying inside because of scurvy and also from just a lack of food. So basically, Port Hudson comes on, they surrender on July 9th, 1863. What does this mean? Well, Vicksburg had surrendered on July 4th. So now that last connection with the Trans-Mississippi Department has been broken. And so this is just as tragic. Now, this is a Courier and Ives, and the actual date is July 9, so don't count that. But what this meant was the Federals now control the Mississippi. The Confederates are denied access to the western part of all those materials and supplies. The river flows unvexed. So this is the Port Hudson operation, despite resulting in a Union victory, is flawed because of several factors, and most of it is leadership. Farragut, because he fails to wait on Banks getting into position and runs past a dangerous river in front of heavy batteries at night, knowing he has to take one curve, then go up and take another sharp curve. And at night, you know, these steamers, and it's they don't have the river very well charted, and so they will actually, Farragut loses one ship and has 3 disabled. So that is a tremendous defeat for him, although he laughs it off, says, oh, no, I got my main ship above Port Hudson, and so all will be okay. I think, so Farragut, this is not his best performance, but if you had captured New Orleans, no one really cared. He did get his men above, or his ship above Port Hudson. Secondly, Nathaniel Banks. Nathaniel Banks, once the person said, he made a beautiful officer. You know, always had the perfect uniform on, accoutrement, everything. However, he was also a very brilliant man, and you would have thought he had the smarts to let those West Pointers decide what to do rather than himself. And so Banks became hands-on commander, not knowing the elements of, you know, military formations and so forth. So Port Hudson is all about what Winfield Scott said in April of 1861. It's all about the Anaconda Plan. This is the closure, the division of the Confederacy, and the opening of commerce for the Michigan, that area of the United States. So Port Hudson is really does not get the fame as a victory as does Vicksburg, probably because Grant is at Vicksburg and does a tremendous job. But in both cases, one of the problems of the Confederates is that they would garrison towns. And garrisoning towns during the Civil War for the Confederates was done because Jefferson Davis said to his commanders, if you retreat from an area, that area is no longer good for the Confederacy. Because once the Union came into that area, then this concept of enslavement no longer worked because the men in blue were considered men of freedom, and so the Confederates couldn't regain that land and reuse it as they would have wanted to. By forcing themselves into a city, that meant the Confederates did not have the supply systems to make those cities be able to defend themselves. And so the Battle of Port Hudson is equal to the capture of Vicksburg, and in fact, it closes the chapter on the war on the Mississippi. Thank you.